Sure.
Just so that I don't misunderstand you, we have some school committees who are here all together, sitting at a table. Now, should they have posted a meeting?
No, and the question is just, and I see some people shaking their head no, and you get an A so far. But if there are members of a committee sitting at a table together, that they're not having a meeting subject to the Open Meetings Act. They're a public body, they're a quorum, but they're not having the meeting element unless they're having some discussion amongst themselves about what their agenda is going to be. But just sitting at the table, listening to this program, talking, asking questions back and forth, and I'll say a little bit flippantly, talking about how great the speaker was, does not subject them to the Open Meetings Act. Because they're not conducting business, because they're not discussing something that they have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over. So that's the key point.
I have a question about the nature of the discussion. As first-time school committee people, we have a lot of questions about information, how procedures work and so forth. Is asking questions to elicit information considered a discussion?
I would say, did everybody hear the question? Asking general questions about procedures, particularly as a first-time member, does that subject you to the Open Meetings Act? I'm going to say generally yes. The reason being, I think it's possible to have that answer be no, but you're getting into such a fine point, and there's no question that there's a spectrum on where these conversations land. You know, talking about a football game obviously is on the outer edge of not even close to being an open meeting situation. When you start talking about the procedures and just how do we get a motion to the floor or whatever it might be, I think you're starting to talk about something that you have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. I think you can make an argument otherwise, but I think you're getting really close to that line. Okay, and I know there are more questions, but let me talk about emails and telephone conversations, because the general rule being that you can't do anything, if you can't do something in person, you also can't do it by telephone or email or some sort of electronic communication. So if Adam and I can have a conversation one-on-one with each other, face-to-face, we can do it by email, we can do it by electronic means. If Adam and myself and some other member can't have a collective discussion or can't have a rolling quorum in person, we can't do it electronically. The one time where you can use electronic communication is to schedule a meeting. So you can have electronic communication, you can have email communication to schedule a meeting only, and we've issued findings that says that also extends to putting an item on the agenda. So I want to talk about this item, or I think this should be discussed, that's permissible, but actually having a substantive discussion of that issue, that's not permissible. Do you have to be physically present at a meeting to participate in it? And the answer is yes. Okay, there's two exceptions. They are if you're on active military duty or if you have a disability and can't otherwise participate. If you fall into the latter category, the Governor's Commission on Disabilities has rules and regulations that you have to comply with. But otherwise, you have to be physically present. You can't call in by conference telephone. You can't do anything like that. The legislature actually has specific laws that are cited here that prohibit that. Listservs, emails that just go out sending information, does not violate the Open Meeting Act. And that may seem contradictory to what I've just said, but let me kind of explain it. If I'm we're in Warwick, so I'll pick on Warwick. If I'm on the Warwick School Committee and I send out an email to all my committee members, that does not violate the Open Meeting Act. The clerk or the superintendent sending out an email to all committee members, that does not violate the Open Meeting Act because there's no collective discussion amongst the members. If I send out an email to all committee members, and again, sorry Adam, but Adam replies to all, then Adam has violated the open meeting law because now he started a collective discussion. So these emails that go out, and these emails, the first email doesn't violate the act, but you got to be really, really careful because that second email may very well violate the act. Tim kind of prefaced this by saying about executive session and open session. All of your meetings presumably start with the presumption that they have to be an open session. That's where you start. Now, there are some topics that you can go into executive session on. We'll talk about how to do that, but you start with that presumption that they have to be an open session. You as the public body have the discretion to have something in an executive session if it falls within an exception. We'll talk about those exceptions in a moment, but it's your discretion. If something's appropriate for executive session and the committee decides they don't want to have it in executive session, that's perfectly permissible. These are not situations where you have to go into executive session. These are situations where you may go into executive session. If somebody wants to attend the executive session, that's also within your discretion. What we have said is, as long as they have a reason to be in executive session, that lies within the discretion of the public body. You can't selectively choose members of the public to attend or not attend, but if you're talking about a school issue and you want the superintendent to attend, or a safety issue and you want the police chief to attend, that's within your discretion, and there's obviously a reason for that person to attend based on the nature of the discussion. If you're going to convene into executive session, there's a process to go into. And again, the checklist that I referenced earlier has this process exactly set forth in checklist to make sure that you don't miss anything, because it does get to be a little bit cumbersome. When you're in open session, you have to vote by majority vote to go into executive session. You have to state in the open session, and you have to record in your executive session minutes, in your open session minutes, the exact subsection of the Open Meeting Act that you're going into executive session for. And again, we'll talk about that in a second. And you have to state in the open session and record in your open session minutes a statement specifying the nature of the business to be discussed. And again, we'll talk about how specific that has to be. You can't discuss any other matter in executive session, even if it would be appropriate. So that's what has to happen to go into executive session. I'm not going to go through all the executive session exceptions. There are 10 of them. But just to kind of highlight a couple, and again, these are on your checklist, and you see the citation, 4246.5. In your book, you have the Open Meeting Act where it has all 10 exemptions listed, A1 through A10. But the first one is you can go into executive session. Again, you don't have to, but you can, for discussions of the job performance, character, or physical or mental health of a person or persons. This is not just employees, it's a person or persons, okay? And you see that we bolded, you can't see it too well, but we bolded the word discussions. We have findings that say because that this allows you to go into executive session for discussions only, and we read the Open Meeting Act very strictly, that you can only have discussions in executive session under this exception. In other words, if you're going to vote under this exception, it has to be done in open session. If you're going to go into executive session under this exception, the person or persons that you're going to be talking about, or I shouldn't say going to be talking about, the affected person or persons, because that's what the statute says, they have to be given advance written notice that they have the option to have that discussion take place in open session. So I may, and again, I'm just picking on Adam today, if we're going to go into executive session to discuss Adam's job performance, we have to give him advance written notice. We're having this discussion in executive session. You have the option to have it in open session. He can exercise that option at any point up to, and I would presume even during the meeting. We have findings that say that he can exercise that right up to that point. And the minutes have to indicate, as you see on the slide, the minutes have to indicate, and you have to indicate in your open call, that he has been provided advance written notice. Providing that notice is really important. This is one of the few points in the Open Meeting Law, in the Open Meeting Act, where it says that if there is a violation, any action that's taken against that affected person shall be declared null and void. So there's no discretion. Yeah, so I think Adam raises a good point and a fair point. I've been stressing that going into executive session is optional under the Open Meeting Act, and as Adam says, that's correct. But we're talking about one law here. There are there's a universe of other laws out there, and the point that Adam raises that I think you have to be aware about, particularly with this exception, that if we were discussing, let's just say Adam's mental health, You raised the question, so you're fair. If we were discussing his mental health, and we said, well, we're going to have it in open session, then we may not be violating the open meeting law, but we may very well be violating his privacy rights, his healthcare confidentiality rights. So you do have to be aware and cognizant of those other laws out there. In this situation, I'm not sure that that would come into play. It depends, because if we were discussing, again, Adam's job performance, character, physical or mental health, we would have to give him notice. Actually, I take that back, because if we decided that we wanted an open session, the affected person does not generally have the right to have it in executive session. So the option doesn't work both ways. If we plan to have an executive session, Adam could have it in open session. If we said we were going to have it in open session, notwithstanding these other concerns, he does not have a right to have it in open session. Yes, advance written notice could be by email. Well, I think you could make the same argument with mail, except for certified mail. But have your email indicate, please confirm, acceptance. So the question is, could somebody, if a discussion was going to be held in open session, could a school committee member go to court and seek some sort of a court action or court order to restrain the committee from having that discussion? That opens up a whole nother world. I mean, I would never say that somebody couldn't go to court. Anybody can go to court. Whether they would be successful in court or not, that's, I learned long ago not to guess what's going to happen in court. So some of the other exceptions, sessions or work sessions pertaining to collective bargaining or litigation, that's permissible for executive session. Investigative proceedings regarding allegations of civil or criminal misconduct. And AA is very similar to the first exception. School committees can go into executive session to conduct student disciplinary hearings or to review other matters that relate to the privacy of students, again, provided that affected student has advance written notice that they can have what's being planned for executive session take place in open session, and that the open call and that the minutes record that student has received advance written notice.